All right, we are now recording. Yes, sir.
I'm coming to you from the middle of the street. Okay, so this is the original. I'm literally standing in the middle of the street, and people were wondering. I'm always moving things around, so I'm actually in the middle of the street.
Okay.
This video or this topic is what I originally wanted the other podcast to be about, which
the one that I
was which was something else, right? It ended up being about the FAA, which if you haven't commented, comment on the FAA. So, and I really dragged you into this as an impartial, rational human being to just check me and make sure I'm not offending too many people, because I know that this topic is incredibly offensive. It just it offends everybody, including myself, over and over and over. Okay. So the topic is China and how they benefit from all this hobby stuff, and really so many other industries, so much more than the people that are actually developing the things, people that are marketing the things, coming up with companies, and trying to do whatever in any industry. And China has done a number of ways to really sort of weaponize their economy to make all this stuff happen faster and easier. And so this comes up. Hello. So this all comes up. So here's the story, basically. So when I was a young kid, all my toys said made in Taiwan. Did you have toys that said made in Taiwan? It had like a sticker on it.
Yep.
And then over the next 10 years or so, as I grew up, I noticed that, all the stuff that I saw that was made in China is now, made in Taiwan, now has a sticker on it that says made in China, right? Incredibly powerful marketing, just that little sticker, that symbol that says made in China. And so I think that more and more companies, this is the part that I'm just making up the story really, more and more companies decided to make things in China more and more. And the Chinese government recognized this as a source of income from outside the United States. And so they nourished this market that was forming. And the ways they nourished this market was to make sure their valuation of their dollar was undervalued compared to the rest of the world. So that means that their workers, their humans, the actual working population did not need to earn a lot of money. And they're still doing that today, manipulating their currency, manipulating everything to make sure that their valuation of their money is low so that it doesn't cost a lot for them to live in China and to work in China. And that's part number one. And that's something
for what it's worth, I mean, that's a common national tactic, right?
Sure.
Like you devalue your currency, and as you devalue your currency, people with higher spending, if you call it spending power, people with higher economic power in relation to you can basically leverage their value against your economy.
Sure.
And so it is, and the U.S., it's not just China that does it. The U.S.
Of course. Everybody manipulates. Right. Of course. But no problem. All that stuff makes sense. So then the next step is that all of the manufacturing prowess, all the manufacturing ability, start walking around, all the manufacturing ability actually developed very, very quickly. All the machinery, all the robotics, all the systems to make all the stuff. And so China developed all the stuff with all these systems. And while the United States and so many other countries are so good at robotics and everything, China is good at it too. And honestly, they're better at it in many ways than many other countries. So that happened. And now you have a country that has very low cost of labor with very good manufacturing prowess. And then the government took this a step further and said, you know what? Let's help this market even more. And they started to do probably about 10 years ago, they started to do some things that are baffling. So you can ship something from China direct to the consumer for $0. The Chinese government picks up the bill, and then they also negotiate with the customs as well. So not only does the U.S. government, but the Chinese government subsidize all shipping fees from China direct to consumer. Now they are also negotiating on behalf of all these companies to get all their stuff through customs around the world. And I have also heard, this is a hearsay only, I've also heard that they do bribe some of these customs agencies to make it easier.
I would not be surprised.
I have two people that have told me this. I can't confirm any of that stuff, but I do know that the government themselves handle all the shipping for the majority of the direct to consumer, and they negotiate with customs agencies. That I have verified numerous times. And so now they have done another thing as well. The Chinese government actually gives these manufacturers and companies that sell direct to consumer and ship direct to consumer, they give them a 12% kickback. Not on everything, but they pay these manufacturers to ship direct to consumer. So what was happening was China, the Chinese government was like, okay, this is great. All these companies are now using our manufacturing to develop all this stuff in China. This is wonderful. And now let's get rid of those companies and just have our companies selling direct to consumer, because we can do that. We don't need these middlemen that are using our potential. And so now these manufacturers and these resellers will take a product that costs $5 to make, store, package, and ship, because shipping is free, and sell it for $5, and then wait for the Chinese government to give them a 12% kickback, and that's their profit. And because the value of their dollar is so low, it's okay. They're okay with that. 12% is great. 12% of a dollar is meaningful in China. In the United States, we can't really function on a 12% margin. The vast majority of the time, depends on the product, depends on many things. So based on all this, it, number one, makes sense why these manufacturers just don't care about user experience. They just do not care if it works even. All they care about is get it out the door. Send it, send it, send it. That's all they want to do. Make sure it's going away from China so that they get their 12% kickback from the government. And for the most part, you can't really contact Chinese support because it's in China. So they will make a dividend on the back end, regardless of how much support they have to deal with, because of the volume. And so this is cheating in a number of ways, and it makes it really impossible for any company that's not a Chinese company to compete with these Chinese companies because of all this stuff. And this I'm not even talking about copying. This isn't even like direct copying. FPV didn't come from China. Counterfeit stuff is counterfeit stuff. That's a different story entirely. This is more like Apple suing Samsung because Samsung has made phones that are so similar to the iPhone that the consumer is confused at what they are buying. And that was what the lawsuit was about. It was about that specific thing, is that they have made a phone that's so similar that the consumer is confused. And that's what China loves to do. They love to do things that confuse the consumer into thinking, oh, this is the real thing. They love doing that. And so this is actually a step further, because now you have a host of very intelligent, the Chinese people as a whole are incredibly shrewd, incredibly intelligent, very, very capable people, incredibly capable people, and they are very cutthroat as well. And so now you have a group of people that are so intelligent with all of this ability behind them, and all they need to do is look for something to sell, look for something to ship, just get it out the door. They will look at every single thing that's being marketed, every single thing that's interesting, every single thing that's hyped, and they will reproduce it. They will make it similar. They will make it confusing for the consumer. This is why we keep getting Chinese action cameras that are actually not that bad, but they happen to be the same shape as a GoPro, or they happen to be the same something as a GoPro. Like, the companies can clearly do it themselves. They don't need to copy GoPro. They don't need to make it look like a GoPro to sell, but they do. And so all this stuff comes into play, and all of it makes sense. And really, what stemmed all this, I've been putting all this stuff together for years. I've been researching there's nothing new here really that I've presented. It's just that many people will consider this offensive because I'm talking about Chinese people. I mean, I have nothing against Chinese people. I love the Chinese people. And I'm also not even talking about a lot of the FPV companies in China, because a lot of them are actually great. A lot of them actually genuinely care. They want to do good stuff. They make great stuff, a lot of them. And I haven't gotten to the part where we need them, don't need them, and whatever's happening with the coronavirus. But
well, you're not. I want to stop you right there. You're not talking about the Chinese people. You're talking about the Chinese economy.
Economy and their culture, really.
Oh yeah. Well, the culture. Now the culture. I mean, I don't have enough experience with either side of that.
Well, this is driven into the culture by the government. It's not the people's fault. The world really did this to China. Like, the world did it to them. It wasn't their fault. And then the government egged it on and made it even more. And so it's been ingrained in them. And so the president of China, Xi Jinping, I forgot his name, but he actually made a statement saying that China's Achilles heel is the fact that they lack innovation, which is hilarious because I think that's the farthest thing from the truth. How do you learn how something works or how something is? You take the damn thing apart.
Yeah.
You take it apart. You take everything apart, and that's what they are good at. They take everything apart. They know exactly how it works. They know where to cut corners, how to make it cheaper, and they can reproduce it, no problems, and they learn everything about it. So they have all the innovation because they know how everything works. Mm-hmm. They just need to apply it if they want to. But do they need to? No, because why would they make something new and then market it to the world? They could just piggyback off somebody else's marketing. Why bother going through the effort yourself? And marketing and branding, this kind of stuff is really the only things that Western culture, the Western world has to defend themselves against what China does and how this looming threat of China exists. And patent protection, all this stuff doesn't work anymore. It doesn't, especially in a small business format, it does not work. If you don't have a set business plan, if you haven't gone to business school to know how to put together a business plan, have serious funding, and have your serious lawyers to protect you, you can't protect anything. And on top of that, they'll still copy it and they'll mimic it. And there's a lot of discussion and debate as to what exactly is a copy. Now, something that I would call a functional copy, somebody else would say it's nothing alike. It's totally different. It's a different color. It's not the same thing. That's something that's up for debate. But here's the whole point of all this. And again, this is where all this stuff stemmed from. So I know 2 ex-Happy Model employees. Mm-hmm. One of these people have actually started their own company, and they're doing great. And then the other one works for another company. And both of them have told me that Happy Model only works on the order of hundreds of thousands of units. They do not work on thousands. They do not work on tens of thousands. They only work on hundreds of thousands. So like the Mobula 6, mm-hmm. they will only produce 100 to 200,000 of them and then sell them to Banggood and whatever express retailers. Mm-hmm. And so if you think about the FPV market as a whole in the United States, the market is about $30 to $35 million a year. That's how much the market is. At least that's my best estimate. And the majority of that market goes to Get FPV, Paraflip, and RDQ. Those are the 3 big ones. They're going to cover 20 million of that market, at least 20 million of that market. It might be even 40 million. But if you look at just the number of Mobula 6s that are sold, that's a quarter to a third of the entire United States FPV market from a company that does nothing to help the hobby except for make things available. And there will be tons of people that come in and say, hey, they're making things so accessible, so cheap, and so worthy, which I would say that is absolutely true. We have done a lot of this stuff to ourselves. And this is why I get so angry at companies that will make a product and then price it so extravagantly high that it just does not make sense. They're just asking for it to be copied. They're asking for somebody else to come along and say, hey, I could do this better. Why are you selling it for so much? Mm-hmm. And so we sort of have done that to ourselves. And a lot of the healthcare market is very much the same in that sense. So if you think about where FPV comes from, where does FPV come from? It definitely doesn't come from China. Yes, they help tremendously. They help with volume. They help with production. They help with manufacturing. A lot of the time, not very good manufacturing. But the FPV comes from outside of China. They just benefit 10 times more at least than anybody that is working in FPV that's trying to develop FPV. And if there was a way to bring even just a third of that money back into the hands of the people that are actually trying to improve something, trying to make something, how much faster would it go? How many more careers would be made? How much farther could we get with FPV? How much more lobbying power do we have against the FAA? How much better would everything be if this parasite that is this economy would not cease to exist, but would slow down a bit? Now, the whole point of this discussion is to get to this point where I kind of engage other people to try and figure out how they might be able to help this situation in some potential way. And so this next part is probably the most offensive part to the entire industry, and offensive to me as well. And a lot of people will object in many ways. And you're like a software guy, right? You do software development? Okay, so this is something that you can genuinely comment on. If beta flight disappeared tomorrow, just gone, vanished out of thin air, never existed, China would probably not make any more ready to fly crap.
Maybe.
Maybe. Big maybe, because it has to be worth it to them to develop their own software suite for doing this stuff. If Betaflight was locked down, you had to license it, you had to pay them to use it, China would have a much more difficult time. We would not see Mobula 6s. We would not see this stuff. Or actually, that's not true. We would see that stuff. We would just see it from Horizon Hobby. We'd see it from Pureflip. We'd see it from Get FPV. And it might be priced way higher than it is right now. And that's another story entirely.
So let me take the other
thing was the open source aspect of it. That's what you can comment on, which a lot of people will say, you know, the whole world is built on open source, which is absolutely 100% true. The internet is literally based off open source software. Like the vast majority of the internet is built off open source software.
Like the internet would not exist without open source software.
It would not exist. And I 110% appreciate that. And I love it. But we're not internet status. We're very, very tiny status right now. And also the vast majority of the open source software systems, software suites that were developed, like I think SQL, like there were companies based off the function of SQL, and the SQL is open source. And then companies started to have issues because the open source software wasn't updated, it wasn't working, and so SQL developers, or the people that were running it, were like, "Yeah, we don't make any money. We can't keep doing this."
So let me back up a little bit. There is an analog to the Chinese economy right now, is an analog the right word? A comparison. There's been something prior that has been exactly like the Chinese economy. It's the U.S. economy. If you look at the U.S. economy from about 1890 to 1950 or 60. The U.S. was one of the primary manufacturing powers in the world. And actually, starting in World War II, I think you can make the case that the U.S. was the primary manufacturing power in the world. You know, if you go back to what happened during World War II, where, you know, Japan...
Yeah, we needed to.
Yeah, I mean, like, we had no choice, and we literally mobilized, like, sent all the men overseas and mobilized all the women to do the work. And the U.S. economy became a powerhouse, right? And all of a sudden, everybody's going through the U.S. to get things like cars and trucks and tanks. And to this day, we're still probably the #1 military manufacturer, right? Eventually, though, that gave rise to a predominant middle class. right? So before that, before manufacturing in the US, before the Industrial Revolution, there was the low class and there was the high class, right? There were the rich people and there were the poor people. There's nobody in between. And I mean, you could probably say like shop owners and you know, people that had small businesses could probably be considered the middle class at that point. But then you introduce manufacturing, it takes the economy up. All of a sudden, a worker's time is worth more money. You have to pay them more, and slowly a middle class emerges, right? And as the middle class emerges, the cost of manufacturing goes up. And ultimately, it gets to a point where the cost of manufacturing is so high that profits become so small that manufacturing has to go somewhere else. And that's when it went from, would it go from the US to Japan to Taiwan and now China, right?
Mexico is coming up too.
Mexico, yeah. And you know what's interesting about China, at least, and I'm not a China expert, I'm not an economist, like I can't speak to this with like, you know, supreme authority. Even though there is like a massive, like, you know, in the US, like the difference between being poor and being rich, you know, the poor in the United States are considered to still be well off compared to a lot of the third world countries, right? So in China, you have people that are living in third world conditions all the way up to people that are living, you know, as billionaires, right? But as what's happening from what I understand now is that there is a middle class that's developing, right? And as that middle class develops, it's actually driving the cost of the economy up and of the manufacturing. And so you see that with people like Apple trying to find cheaper places to manufacture electronics, going to India, going to other places. And some of that also is because, like, you're right, the Chinese has Chinese market and the Chinese manufacturing engine has a almost complete stranglehold on everything that is electronics based, right?
Yeah.
Most of your chips are built, or they're not designed, but they're put together or laid out or lithographed, however you want to look at it, in China, right? All of the gyros that we get for our flight controllers, they come from China. The capacitors, the flight controllers, everything we get pretty much comes from China that goes on our drones. Even the carbon fiber that we use, pretty much all comes from China.
That's the other thing that sparked my interest in actually making this video or talking about this, is that because of this coronavirus thing, there have been 3 companies that have independently set up manufacturing facilities for electronics in the United States. The cost of the manufacturing is actually less than China. How? But it's been difficult to get there. And they can't do the volume. They can't do the volume that China does. They can't do hundreds of thousands. They can do
automation.
1,000. Yeah, it's all automation. That's the thing. It's all done through automation. So the same thing that Tesla did is that they're like, you know, screw it. Right. Why do we need people? Right. Let's just automate everything. And then they have to go backwards because they're like, okay, automation is
we
perfect.
Automated too much and it sucked.
A little too automatic there.
Yeah.
But the same kind of idea is that because we have the automation prowess, we're not better than them. We just can do it. Manufacturing in general has just become so easy. And that is also another issue as well, is that manufacturing stuff has just become so easy that there's just like, I mean, I was just looking at Lululemon. There's like 9 different Lululemons now, like all well known. And I'm like, hey, I want to make scrubs out of the Lululemon material because it would be so comfortable. Yeah. And I'm like, why? I could just I found a manufacturer. I talked to a friend. He's like, yeah, I have a clothing manufacturer in China. We'll make it for you. Like literally 2 phone calls. I'm like, yeah, I can actually do this. All I need to do is make the marketing campaign and I'm good to go. And so it's just become so freaking easy to do all this stuff. And I just wonder where everything's going and what's going to happen. But going back to the point, what can we do to not enable China to take our market, share? One thing I think is to try and lock down the software a little bit. I'm not talking about like craziness, just honestly, the Betaflight people, they do so much work. They get nothing for it. And it's great. I mean, I'm happy. I support them. I'm happy to do whatever. It's great. But like, really, how can anything continue? Like, this entire industry is built off passion. It's built off passion and drive, which is fantastic. But at some point, we need like professionals to go through this stuff, not just tinkerers here and there. I mean, there's so many different open source software suites that are just managed by tinkerers. We need professionals to move things forward, really. And so,
well, you do have. I mean, so first off, the Betaflight guys, they do phenomenal work. I mean,
amazing, incredible. It's as state of the art as it gets.
I honestly don't understand. I mean, it has to be passion.
It's the only thing. It's the only thing.
These guys are slinging code that's unreal, and
they're gifted. They're truly gifted.
They are,
but they're not. This isn't their profession to just do Betaflight.
Right. Well, I'm pretty sure most of them have some kind of engineering job, you know, that they do go to every day.
Yeah, but if they could do this full time,
right. So, well, there is a group that is trying to do this professionally, if you would. And you know, we're tossing around that term in a way that, you know, it's iffy, but let's just say profession is, I'm being paid to do this thing right here, and that thing is develop software for flight controllers. Let's just start there. You know, there's Preston and the Flight One team, or whatever they're called now.
Which, by the way, I have. He actually contacted me to try and bury the hatchet, and very big guy for that.
Yeah.
I'm really hoping to see some really great stuff come out of Flight One, and I'm working with them to at least make sure that everything is compatible and makes sense. Right. Not like their stuff doesn't make sense, but like just another eye on the stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm really looking forward to their stuff. I'm really hoping it's going to work out. And then also KISS.
Yeah, but there's KISS too, right? So there's two groups, companies, whatever you want to call them, that they do not. It is not open source. It is not. It's paid for and funded, and now it may go on Chinese electronics, but the software is not available. Let me take you to Google, right? Google open sources so much.
Yeah.
Right. They open source an incredible amount of things. Like, I mean, everything from, you know, their BigQuery engine to, which is like, you know, one of the most scalable databases in the world, to languages, to, you know, they open sourced all the Chrome code. Well, I guess technically, actually Apple did that. But, you know, they Android open source, or the base is open source.
Yeah.
But Google doesn't open source things that give them a competitive edge. And that's the thing that I think a lot of people miss. It's like, oh, well, we're going to open source, you know, we're going to open source Android, right? And for the longest time, they did not know how to get a competitive edge in an open source Android world. And so what they ended up starting to do is they put, you know, basically they wrote into the open source license that you can use this, but if you want to put the Google services on it, if you want Gmail, if you want Chrome, if you want the Google App Store, then you have to pay us to do it, and you have to abide by our rules, right? So they were able to reassert some control over what they were doing.
So easy to sideload all those apps anyways.
It is. Oh, I mean, it is. And let's be honest, like, I mean, the whole Google Samsung thing is, you know, and so everybody knows, like, I was an iOS engineer for forever.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I wasn't.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I worked for
wow,
a mobile analytics company called Flurry. We're the largest mobile analytics company in the world. Probably still is. But dude, I mean, I've written code that's in the SDKs that sit on the phones. I could probably make the claim that some of my code has been run more than just about anything else in the world. because it sits in all the phones.
Yeah.
All the phones, right? So anyways, I digress. Yeah, Android and Samsung, like, you know, in the early years you had like all these players. Eventually it shook out that Samsung makes all the devices and Android makes the software, and the two can't exist without each other. The balance of power probably shifts more towards Samsung. Anyways, all that to say, yeah, Betaflight is a huge, like, if Betaflight were owned by a company and they could pay all those devs, then it would be a huge advantage to, I guess, locking down the bargaining power, if you will, if you want to think of it that way. And you know what's interesting is that even though the Betaflight guys right now have the advantage, I would say, you know, Kiss at one point, Kiss will probably leapfrog them. The Flight One guys will probably leapfrog them. Like, that's how they all just kind of leapfrog each other, right? So right now, Betaflight is ascendant. But it was funny because I was actually talking to Thomas Bitmodel last night, and we were talking about you know, how TBS forked OpenTX, and they forked OpenTX and they made it a lot better, right? They forked it, they made it. They did. They made it work with Crossfire. They did a lot of things that, well, I mean,
it's so awful. I don't know why people love it so much.
Well, and you know, there's everybody's been saying, oh yeah, they're probably gonna merge it back into the main,
the real one,
the main OpenTX, and I told Thomas and I were talking about it, and I was like, they'd be insane to do that.
Yeah, for sure they would.
100%. Do not do that. Like, if Trappy ever watches this, dude, do not merge.
No, you would never do that.
Do not merge your branch back into OpenTX. Like, you have such a huge competitive advantage now because you've taken the OpenTX code that is, you know, questionable. And I you know, I know that there are probably a lot of people that have worked very hard on that. But Trappy and TBS spent a lot of money to make it better, and a lot of research time, and like, this has apparently been going on for 2, 3, 4 years, right? And so, like, why would you give up that competitive advantage, right? I mean, you know, Thomas, it was funny because Thomas held up a Futaba controller that was $1,500, and he held up the Tango 2, which was, I guess, in Australian 300, right?
Yeah.
And he was like, these two are pretty much equivalent. And then he went on to say, and I actually prefer the Tango to ergonomics.
Yeah, because isn't he a thumber?
Yeah, he's a thumber.
So that fits his hand better.
Fits him. Yeah. So anyways, I think we're far off field. But yeah, I mean, the software is, in this industry, the hardware has progressed pretty fast. The software has moved at lightning speed. It is like, if you look at you know, here we go, right here. This is an X-Racer F303. This was my favorite flight controller for forever. Right?
It was like 2 years ago. It's not even that long ago.
I think it's older than that. I think I got it in 2016.
2 or 3 years.
Yeah, it's like at least 4 years old. And that flight controller, which is an F3 in FPV terms, is ancient, flies beautifully.
Yeah, I know. I tried it. I did an F1. I put the new code on an F1.
Put the new code on F1. And I was like, oh my God, this is awesome. Right now, you can't. They've, like, Betaflight finally outpaced the F3 processors, right? But I mean, I can get Betaflight 401 onto an F3 controller and it flies beautifully, right? And I don't have to tune it. I don't have to do anything. I set my rates and I just fly. That's where the game is. Like, even if, you know, the manufacturing prowess is important, right? Like, if we lost China as the major manufacturer right now, FPV would change radically. But the innovation is coming off of basically what amounts to off-the-shelf electronics that have really good software running on them.
Yeah, this is a software industry more than anything else. It's really a software. There's a little bit of engineering and aerodynamics of mechanics of things in there, but it's primarily a software industry.
You probably could make a statement that motors are not
software.
Well, they're not software, obviously, but there's probably say again.
Pretty darn close to software, where the ESC code improves, and oh my god, all of a sudden we have. I mean, can I put 48 kilohertz in my Tesla? It would be great.
I mean, I'm just saying, like, the actual motors have also been, I've got some old Cobra 2205 sitting right here.
It really hasn't changed much since then.
Well, they've gotten, they've changed in the sense of the magnets they're using and how they're winding things.
But basically, that's it. It's, oh my god, another thing.
Yeah.
I have spent the last 6 months actually trying to go after Amazon, or just trying to talk to Amazon to get copies of my. Actually, Armatan is probably one of the most copied companies out there. And at least across eBay, Amazon is littered with Armatan copies. And like all the comments, all the reviews say this is a copy, get what you pay for. It's good, but it's a copy. Like they all say it in the comments, and they still won't even listen to me when I'm like, just look at the comments. It's clearly not legitimate, and this seller is not legitimate. Take them off your site. 6 months I've been going back and forth with them. I'm at the highest legal department. When they talk to me on the phone, they genuinely are saying, we're going to help you. We're going to try to stop this. We don't stand for this. We don't want this. And then they do nothing. And then I call back in another week, and the story goes all over. It keeps going around and around and around. I have like
is it that they do nothing, or is it that they're so enabling of being?
No, they don't. They do nothing. They don't care. They want more sales. The more sales is the better. They don't give a shit. We'll take anybody. I mean, they killed Toys R Us. They killed they literally killed Toys R Us. I mean, Amazon killed, Toys R Us would not cooperate. So they're like, screw you. They bought all the toys. Toys R Us couldn't buy any more supply. And they started selling the toys at below cost. Because they're like, you know what? They won't cooperate with us, so we'll kill them. And so
they're killing off brick and mortar. It's not just Toys R Us. I mean, if it's a brick and mortar store, Amazon's doing it in. Yeah, I mean, there's the cloning argument. I think if right now, where it is February 25th, we're in the midst of the beginnings of what will probably become a worldwide pandemic. Right? It has locked down Hubei province for.
No, it's definitely coming.
It's coming. Yeah, I mean, it's
for sure it's going to come.
Yeah,
it's not that big of a concern, really. But it is. It doesn't only target like the elderly or the people that are sick or anything like that. And oh man, the things I've heard from these Chinese workers are just out of this world. I mean, they're saying the guy that died from the doctor that died from the virus himself. That was the first person to kind of text his classmates and saying, "Hey, there's something coming that's similar to SARS."
Yep.
I'm pretty darn confident that the Chinese government killed him. He got the virus, and then the Chinese government was just like, "Oh, cool! Now we can kill him legitimately."
Wow!
And apparently, from the hospitals and in any of these cities that are highly infected, the government just comes and takes a couple hundred people away every day. I mean, the things they say is just unreal. It doesn't make sense.
Well, and they've the reports are starting to come out that they're actively not only clamping down on social media hashtags and things like that, of course, but knocking on people's doors and saying, you commented on something, we don't like it, sign this paper, if you ever do it again, you're going to disappear. So
it's madness. It's mind-blowing. It really truly is. But that stuff is coming, and so it might change a lot more.
Well, and so where I was going with this, though, is, we're already, Hubei province is locked down. It's starting to spread across most of China. It's getting into Korea now. Korea and China are the two major, electronics manufacturers in the world, right? Like if it's not made in China, it's made in Korea. So go look at what's happening to the stock market, right?
Yeah.
So the hardest hit right now are travel companies, especially cruises, cruise ships. But you know, airlines, cruise ships, like they're getting hammered, right? They're down 10%. Anything that relies on China to produce electronics is down anywhere from 5 to 7%. So Apple's down. You know, Intel.
This is their chance. This is their chance to take the hobby back.
I don't, you know, I don't know if it is. I mean, I'm just, you know, like if you talk about removing the Chinese economy from our hobby,
no,
like,
I can't remove it. They're necessary,
right?
And then a lot of them are good. A lot of them are good.
Yeah,
but still, yeah.
And I don't, and for what it's worth, I don't think either one of us is arguing that we want to remove the Chinese economy.
No, and that's why you're here, is so that I don't sound like
this is a hypothetical. Okay, I just want to be clear. Like, what happens if the Chinese economy just poof disappears or never was? What is this? What does this industry look like? And it looks radically different. It's probably more expensive.
Yeah.
There are not as many flight controllers, right? Beta flight may or may not exist. The need for beta flight might go away, right? It might just be flight 1 and KISS. The things like ESCs getting better would probably slow down. Flight controllers.
Would it though? But why?
Maybe not.
So do you know Olaf?
I don't.
You know Olaf? Okay, Olaf is a super smart kid, and he literally hand makes all of his flight controllers.
Really?
Like he from this entire industry, he has gone from nothing, from just a fan of mine. I mean, he was so excited to meet me. It was so like I don't know what people are excited about, but hey, he was really excited to meet me.
No, you know what it is, Bob? It's your hands. Like, people are really into your hands. Okay, it's very strange to see your face, but we'll keep moving.
So like, I keep in contact with him, and over the last 2 years or so, 2-3 years, he has learned. Like, he's pretty good at software, and he is really good at electrical engineering, and he has developed like a 7-layer board that he develops all himself at home, like on his own. Like, he gets the board made and then puts the chips on and then cooks it and gets it. It's crazy. Like, he is a one-man manufacturing show, and he sent me his flight controller that we've like kind of sort of put together, but I keep telling him, hey, I have an order for you, just make them and get them to me. And he's actually working on. He's one of the people that have set up U.S. manufacturing to get all this stuff made, and and he's got like these ideas and designs for future things. It's just incredible.
Yeah.
And like, this is just one 16-year-old kid that was able to put all this stuff together, and just amazing. And so, sure, it might not be as abundant without China. But it's like, if a great 16-year-old kid can figure this stuff out, not like he's bad in any way. He's very intelligent, better than most older people. I mean, it wouldn't cease to exist. We would figure out other ways to do it. Well, the passion is much stronger than China.
That leads me to think about, like, how do you solve the problem of getting the electronics, right? China has obviously taken the path of, we're going to throw bodies at it, right? We are going to pay a bunch of people $1 an hour and throw 50,000 of them.
$100 a month. It's not $1 an hour.
I mean, it's not. Yes, I'm sure. I have no idea what they're getting paid, honestly. But you know, they're getting put into compounds and barracks, and they never leave. And they work 12-hour days, and they like live, eat, breathe, sleep there. They make, like you said, $100 a month, and there's 50,000 of them, or however many in a factory, right? We couldn't do that in the U.S. We couldn't do that.
Yeah, we couldn't.
It's impossible to throw bodies at it in the U.S. Even if you were to lower the minimum wage. Right, and we're talking about raising the minimum wage, right?
It's impossible. Yeah.
So now there is another way to do it, which is what Elon Musk did. Which is
automation.
You do automation. You start replacing the people with robots, because you don't have to pay robots. Yeah.
But then you get all the factory workers being angry because they're taking all their factory jobs.
Yep.
Yeah, they're high-paying jobs.
Yeah. The manufacturing, if China were to go away, I don't know that the manufacturing necessarily comes back to the US. I think it goes somewhere else where labor is cheap. It goes to India. It goes to Mexico. It goes somewhere else. Now, it takes a while for the tooling to ramp up. It takes a while for it's not trivial to stand up a chip plant, right? It's not trivial to, sure, cutting carbon. Okay. CNC machines, like anybody can, and when I say anybody, and that's not right.
No, really anybody can do it.
Well,
but doing it well is difficult, and doing it in high volume.
Yes, doing it well and doing it with volume is difficult, but you could probably do that in the US. Doing chip manufacturing, there's a lot of tooling that you have to stand up. In order to stand it up, then that's where the difficulty comes, right? So that doesn't even take into account the cost of paying the people, right? So I don't know, man. If you were like, if we talk about enabling China, like China has this, I don't disagree. It's a parasitic economy. I think that there's a guy in the White House right now that would agree with you.
No, oh my God, that is the last thing that I wanted to like.
No, you better stop. Don't say anything else. Don't say anything else.
No, that's not. That being said, he's like the only politician to be like, "Hey, what the hell's going on over here? Why is this okay?"
Yeah, and there's also, but the nuance I think that Trump missed is that our economies are now interleaved, right? Yeah. The U.S. economy can't exist without the Chinese.
Actually, not totally true. If the United States disappeared, China would lose, I think, like 6 or 8% of their GDP. We're like nothing to them. But the issue with them is that if we strike a good deal or whatever he's supposedly trying to do, then everybody else will follow. All the other countries will be like, wait, what? No, you can't do that with them and not do it with us.
Right. And
that's the issue that China has. That's why they're not just like, okay, go away, do whatever the hell you want. We don't care.
Yeah. Yeah. So
this has gone on too long already. 47 minutes. We're good here. This is more than enough. I don't know if people listen this long. If you've listened this long, then you're probably flossing your teeth.
Yes, you should floss. I flossed the other day, man. It was great.
Yeah.
It was right after I ate a bunch of what's that? The gummy candy that the
other day. What about this day?
I don't know. It was like a week ago. But when I was flossing, I did think Bob would be very proud of me right now.
Yes. Yes. Okay, this is great.
All right.
Cool, it's 8 o'clock. It's time to go eat.
All right, buddy.
Thanks so much for being here and keeping me from looking like a crazed lunatic, like people think I am for some reason.
No, I will say this. I think you're thinking deeply about the industry in a way that not a lot of people are, or not a lot of people are willing to admit that they are. Yeah. And it's very opaque to people like me or folks that are just average consumers. So I think that deep thinking needs to happen. It is a very touchy subject, though. So.
You're a very good motivational speaker.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, take care.
All right,
good night.
Bye.
Did it stop?